Hello, and welcome back to another episode of School of Self-Worth. This week, I sit down with Annie Sanchez, who shares about her journey learning to follow the whispers and how doing so helped her to take bold leaps and bet on herself, even when she was unsure of where to start or how to do it. Annie is a visionary guide, healer, and CEO of Mariposa Strategies, supporting sensitive, visionary leaders and entrepreneurs through big change as a strategic and emotional thought partner. She hosts the Courage, Culture, and Clarity podcast and is the founder of the Women of Color Culture Club. If you're a high achieving woman wondering how to buck the rules to lead a life of your own creation, this conversation is for you. So I'm so delighted to be here with you, Annie. Thank you so much for being on School of Self-Worth.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we had one previous connect, and I loved the range of conversation we had. So I'm really looking forward to where we go today. And really, Annie, you do so many things, and you really serve out in the world as a leader. And I'm just curious, I'd actually love to start by hearing how you would describe what you do with other people and how you share yourself in the world.
Yes. It's a very interesting question at this time, at this moment in history, at this moment in my life, at this moment in my business. What I do with other people, what I help people do, how I show up in the world, in pretty much regardless of, no matter the offer or the engagement, whether it's through my business or someone else's, I'm at the heart of who I am is a strategic problem solver. That's always been true ever since I was a little kid. And these days, what that really looks like is a combination of strategic and emotional thought partnership. It's kind of coaching, it's kind of strategic planning, it's kind of life coach, it's kind of business coach, it's kind of nonprofit board director leadership support, it's CEO guidance, it's retreats, it's tangible, pragmatic dot connection, depending on the people and the circumstance. But in every relationship in my life, from professional to personal, like Annie will help you figure it out. Like I'm a figure outer. I've always been a figure outer. And so I really see myself as a strategic and emotional thought partner.
Beautiful. I love that. I love meeting another woman who has so many strengths in so many areas of life. And I'm curious for you then, if wherever you want to start with sharing your journey about how you got to this place of being able to do that. One of the things we, ask what you'd like to talk about. And one of the things I love the way you phrase this is following the whispers, even when it doesn't make sense. And so I'm curious if you could even start with sharing your journey from like, how did you start to follow the whispers? And was there a time where you didn't know how to follow the whispers? And how did that start to come together?
Oh, yes, yes, yes. Well, so let's see here. If I think I'm not going to go linearly, I'm just thinking what immediately comes to mind, a time when I was following the whispers before I even fully understood exactly what I meant by that, was in my early 20s. So 20 years ago. I'm in my early 40s now. In my early 20s, Annie was brave. She was courageous. She was inspired. She believed in possibility, in like the real truest sense of the word. Never got hung up on things when things didn't work out. I have done so many things. I am a licensed esthetician. I am a certified professional nonprofit fundraiser. I'm a certified business advisor. I worked in the fine dining hospitality industry for 16 years. I've produced events for 19 years. I almost went to school to be a sommelier at one point. Like, I know a lot about a lot. And I think in my early 20s, that was the time when I was just following my inspiration, following the whispers, not attached at all to what people thought, what I thought I was supposed to do. I knew I was never going to go to college. That was never the thing. There were moments in my 20s and even very, very early 30s, where I thought, oh, maybe I should go try to pursue a degree. And then would kind of try to start to do it. And then it was like, no, 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 this is not the thing. This is not it. This is not my path. And so that I would say 5 or 6 years in my early to mid 20s was just ripe with inspiration and honoring all that inspired me. Going after, trying this, signing up for that, traveling here. I traveled so much throughout my 20s and early 30s for about 15 years. I really identified as an explorer. I've been to so many countries. I've backpacked all over for extended periods of time, chicken buses and hitchhiking and bus crashes in Peru and trains all over Europe. And just, I've done a lot of different things in the early kind of first half of my life that didn't seem like a big deal. None of it seemed like a big deal. It seemed completely normal. And I know now that it's not that normal. Not a lot of people do that. And I can reflect now and think, wow, that was, how did I know? How did I know how to do that? How come I wasn't scared? How come I wasn't worried about money or my safety, or, and I was often traveling with people, with my sister in particular. We were a real tight unit in our early 20s. We just did things together. But I realize now that I was often the idea person, like, oh, let's do this. Oh, let's move there. Oh, let's try that. And it was like, okay, we'd put our heads together and figure it out and go. Which I recognize as a privilege and a gift to have somebody, the power of two, that to have somebody that you feel safe with and mutual and trust and can carry the weight of the thing, whatever the thing might be. So there was a lot of whisper following in those early adult years. And there were moments where they went quiet. They were really, really hard to hear. I would say late 20s, a lot of self-doubt, a lot of fear, a lot of worry about, I don't even know what now, but I think at the time was like, what am I doing? Like, because I didn't have a stake in the ground with any one thing in particular. I was licensed in all these things. I was excellent at all these things. I was doing all of these things. I was traveling. I was still making money. I was like, I never really had anything practically to worry about. But I think it wasn't even necessarily a concern of getting older. It was just this period in my life where I started to get scared. A lot of things were changing. It was at that point in my life, my late 20s. And so the whispers started to get really quiet. And I felt like my thinky brain needed to figure things out before my inspiration. Like if I couldn't find it, I'd like, let me think it through. Let me find the answer, which has never been long-term sustainable. When I think my brain is going to figure it out for me, I know that it's deeper inside where the answers live. Yeah. Then I think the whispers started to show up again in my early 30s. And then I lost my mom in my kind of early, like I was 33, 9 years ago. And everything was like, nothing mattered after that. I was like, what even is this life? Who am I in this world without her? What was I working towards? What did I care about? Do I still care? Am I still working towards those things? So there was a couple of year phase where I was both mourning, like deeply mourning, and trying to figure out who I was without this just steady known presence in my life that always made me feel like I would be okay no matter what. Yeah, maybe 6 years ago, 2017-ish, they started to show up again, but they were less whispery and more anguish cries. Like, all right, Annie, you're not good. Like, let me conk you over the head with this. Like, pay attention. So then I started paying attention again. And I feel like, oh, okay. I've been back. Like, I've been back to who little Annie was always, Annie in her early 20s was, early 30s Annie. I feel like for the first time, really interesting to be talking to you like today of all days. I feel like at this moment in time, what is today, May 1st,
Mm-hmm.
2023. If we had had this conversation May 1st, 2022, it would be very different. Like I've moved through a portal that it was filled with daggers and knives and fire and deep water that I couldn't swim in for the last couple of years, even though I'm on the right side of the intuition and knowing. I feel like a lot of old grief that didn't fully move through my mourning period had to get dealt with over the last year. And so when I think of like the whispers today, it's all so simple, actually. I really see things so simply right here and right now, looking at things through very different eyes than even 4 months ago, certainly a year, 2, 5, 10 years ago. I know that the whispers that they sometimes are really loud and obvious. And I have to ask, is it like I'll ask God, is this the sign? Can I get one more sign to make sure that this is the sign to confirm?
Backup
It's like
signs.
it's so literal and obvious. Like it couldn't be more for me.
Mm-hmm.
And others are really on a body, a vibrational soul, heart, very subtle body, like little vibrations, little twinges, the slightest twinge of anxiety, which I've learned lives very, very closely in my body to where my inspiration and excitement lives. They're like next door neighbors in my actual body, and so I have to be really, really discerning and paying really close attention when the actual physical sensation shows up. Like, is that anxiety or is that excitement? And it doesn't mean I need to run from the anxiety, but it helps me to discern and determine the way to move. Um, so, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but the whispers are, we all have them, we all have
Mm-hmm.
them in learning.
Well, I have so many questions, but I'm going to go first back to that early 20s era because what I was really hearing from you is like you were just really clear on who you were at that time and you were following it. And, you said you just kind of followed where the wind took you and you didn't worry about anything. And what I'm curious most about is like, were you aware at that time or how were you able to counter the programming that lives societally that says that's not the right choice or that's not, like you said, you didn't realize it was an unusual choice? And how did you have, because to me, that's like somebody who's like really clear on who they are and their worth and their value, living life according to the way that feels good. And that's, I feel like so many of us then spend all our 20s and 30s trying to figure that journey out. And it continues on 40s and 50s and 60s, right? So, how did you at that time, like, could you now put together what it was that was occurring in early 20s, Annie, that she was able to do that?
It's a very good question. Let's see here. Well, what I find really interesting when I think about it, like given how free I felt completely free and like I could literally do anything. Um, and the person that was my, kind of constant, steady companion was my sister, my big sister at the time. We and we're very, very different. She's quite we're like the opposite, really, when I think about it. She's very we're both strategic, practical. We're people who can make things happen. We figure it out. That's like we for years, all through our early years of school and this and jobs and interviews and resumes. Like she was the person I would trust to review things and copy edit in the way it's like I know she's going to give it a thorough eye, and the same was true with me. Yet there's this free spirit that I know that I've always been, and I think it's part of who she is too, but it shows up differently. And so when I think about what was it that made it like early 20s Annie, if I were to kind of reconstruct what set me free. I think I go back to little Annie, like 11-year-old Annie, 8-year-old Annie, 15-year-old Annie. My mom she had both my sister and I. She had my sister when she was 19. She had me when she was 21. Her and my dad were together until I was in middle school. I never had any memories of my childhood but good ones. They were all, I felt loved and cared for and safe. I never felt like we didn't have what we needed, though by almost every measure, we would have been in like the lower middle class, maybe upper poor people category for sure. But we felt loved and cared for and had what we wanted. It felt like that. And from the very, very early days the earliest that I can remember, it must have been like second grade Annie, fourth grade Annie. I remember in fourth grade going on a trip with my mom to San Francisco. She did hair for a living in New Mexico, but had clients in San Francisco. And so she used to fly there every month. And I remember she took me with her in fourth grade. And little Annie, even pre-fourth grade, always wanted to be in a city. I had never even been in a city at that point. San Francisco was the first time at, 10 years old. My grandmother, who's still alive, she'll be 98 this year. She often says, oh, little Annie wanted to live in a city and wear a suit and carry a briefcase. I was like, she sure did. She really did. And so going on this trip with my mom and like being exposed to, this big city, being exposed to unhoused people, being exposed to the big tall buildings, being exposed to all of these, the hustle and bustle, was like, oh yeah, this is for me, this kind of life. I didn't even think, oh, I'm moving here. But it was like, I was into it. And all through my, elementary, middle school, and high school years, because I am free-spirited and believe that I can literally do anything, I got into a lot of trouble. I was testing a lot of boundaries. I've gotten into a fair amount of big trouble. Safety definitely was compromised at multiple times in my teenage years. But my mom never once made me feel like I was failing, like I was screwing up, like things were going to crumble. And I often think of now how at that time she would have been in her like early 30s when a lot of the questionable choices Annie was making were occurring. I think, how did she know to parent me in a way that centered me, my possibility? She used to say, Annie, you are going to do something so big. I cannot wait to see it. She would say until the day she died, until I was 30. She's like, I cannot wait to see what you're going to do. And so that was always present with me. Every single time I was coming into some kind of trouble, it was like, I'm going to be okay. I'm always going to be okay, because we are always okay. We are always okay. We are always okay. And so I think that fed into, certainly graduating from high school. My high school guidance counselor, my sophomore year, I can remember sitting in her office and her encouraging me to drop out and get my GED because I was hardly ever there. And she said, I think maybe this might be a better path for you. I was like, no, I'm fine. I'm going to be fine. I'm going to watch. I'm not them. Nothing wrong with getting your GED. My mom and my dad both have their GED. I was like, no. You don't understand. And I ended up graduating. I walked with my class, technically graduated a semester early. But my mom had an eye on me. And my junior year of high school, she removed me from my environment and sent me to San Francisco, where my big sister and her best friend were living. So I did my junior year of high school in the city, right outside the city, actually, in Daly City. And thank goodness, thank my mom, that she knew to do that. She said, you would be better off here. And so it was a way to calibrate my path and put me back on, possibilities, and I can do anything, and I'm here to do something big. to get all of the distractions away. And so when I was easing into my 20s, like it was just this purest sense of, I wouldn't say invincibility. Teenage years, I definitely felt like I was invincible, but there was something that changed as I became an adult. In my junior year, I had a job. I bought my first car, went back to New Mexico to graduated a semester early. I was one of the kids who had a job and money and could buy things. Like things really got fixed in that year. And so as I moved into my young adult life, I had a sense of responsibility behind me already. I had already been doing things for myself and working, and had already gotten through a lot of really troubling circumstances. So it's like, oh, I've kind of been there, done that. Like, let's go travel the world. Let's go do this thing. I'm kind of excited and inspired by this idea, this thing. Like, let me go explore it. And my mom just constantly planting the seed. You can do anything. Something she used to also say was, you get what you settle for. Ever since we were kids, you get what you settle for. Something that used to bother her is when people would say to her, if something lovely had occurred or whatever it might have been, oh, must be nice. She's like, yeah, it is. It really is. It's so nice. And so just this, we deserve the life that we want to live. The fact that she made an arrangement for herself to be traveling monthly to this city that she loved. Half of her ashes are sprinkled in the bay. That was her city. So I got to bear witness to her doing something that was really out of the ordinary for someone coming from where she did, where she did, especially where she grew up. So it's just a lot of positive reinforcement and affirmation that really set me up in my 20s. And any little glimmer of excitement or inspiration to go somewhere or do a thing, I would just do it. I would just do it. And I knew I would figure it out along the way.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. I love hearing all of like how your mom's support made such a difference for you in terms of being able to just be clear on yourself during that era. And that is an interesting thing, because when I think back to myself, like not, I was really living life according to what other people were really encouraging me to do, or like what you're supposed to do at that time. And I did it in journalism, which is like not it's a corporate ladder in its own sense. And so hearing from you, it's like, oh, like having that baseline support from your mom really made such a huge difference. So really for you, like, it sounds like your mom was such a part of that. And then I'm curious, because you shared that she passed when you were in your 30s, and that was very destabilizing for you. And I'm curious, how did you find then an anchoring again once she was gone? Was it still her? Was it something else that gave you that when the whispers, kind of came back later? But what helped you feel that value and that worth again? Because she was teaching it to you. And what I was hearing a bit is like she was providing that anchor, and then she passed, and it's like, oh, well, that anchor isn't her. Like she was just teaching you how to anchor. And when we're younger, we don't understand that distinction almost, like, because that person is the anchor, rather than realizing she was teaching you to fish, but you had to figure out that she had taught you to fish. And that's what I'm curious about, how that process went for you.
Oh my gosh, that is such it's a beautiful question. It's a huge question. Let's see how I can do answering this. So in addition to my mom being just my best friend in every way, I mentioned the relationship with my sister was really, really close. We lived all over together. We traveled all over together. We shared a bedroom until I was 30, I was like 29. And so and she was 3 years older than me. So there was this sense of, safety in her. And when our mom died, we grieved differently, for sure. She's a mother of 3, lived a block from my mom. I was still free-spirited Annie doing my thing, and we grieved differently. It took us both quite a bit of time, but in different ways. And I think when I finally was able to really kind of be in the world again, which probably took me about 18 months. About 2016, there were a couple of key people who I didn't necessarily think of in this way. And I think I'm kind of realizing it as I'm saying it to you, that were I don't necessarily want to call them mentors, but kind of, who were this like little unit, these best friends of my mom's. Everybody loved her. Everybody thought of her as their best friend. But she had a few key people throughout her life that were like who she really considered her best friends. And I remember in 2015, so it was less than a year after she died, I started working a nonprofit job that the only reason I even said yes, at that point, I was just living off my credit card and trying to figure out what I was doing with my life because I thought maybe I would move. But the person who hired me, who wanted me to work for her, was one of the first people I met when I moved back home in 2012. I had left, right after high school. And she just had kind of been a steady presence for a couple of years. She said, I really want you to come work for me. And I said, you just want me to come work for you because you're sad that my mom died? She's like, no, I've been wanting you to work for me since you moved here. And now the position is opening and you're the only one. Like, you need to come work for me. And I loved her and felt safe with her. And so I said yes. So I started working for her, and it gave me a sense of like, oh, I felt safe and loved in this environment that I otherwise would have never found myself in. Of all nonprofits, it was a very corporate-like nonprofit, not the traditional grassroots, scrappy, community work. It's higher up and more philanthropic. And just not my vibe at all. But I loved her and I felt safe with her. And we were doing this very cool pocket of work within the organization. About a year into working together, we were sitting in her office and she said, just normal one-on-one. And we had our meeting and she said, okay, before you leave, I have to tell you that I'm moving to Colorado in a month. It's like, what are you talking about? Burst into tears in her office. Like, what am I supposed to do? I felt safe and anchored by her. Her name is Amy, and she happens to share my mom's birthday. So anyway, after I finished crying and cussing and freaking out, she said, okay, what you're going to do is this. You're actually going to take my job, but you don't have to. And I was like, what are you even saying? Like, I'm a server. I'm only doing this thing that you told me to, like, I don't even know what you do. She said, no, but you do. And you're going to do it. You're going to take it. And this is what you're going to negotiate for. This is how much I make. This is what you're negotiating for. And you only really need to stay a year or two max. And then you'll move on. And when you're ready to move on, we'll talk. It's like, okay. So I just did what she told me to do because I needed somebody to tell me what to do. So I did. I took that position in 2016. Immediately, it was like, what am I doing? I literally had no idea what I actually was doing. I didn't understand the job. It took me a while to get my sea legs under me. You'll remember that, of course, the 2016 elections were really awful here in the United States, really toxic and scary. And it felt like for that next year, so that happened, those elections in November 2016, I took this position a little earlier that year. So then a whole year goes by and I was just trying to figure out how to be the director of this organization and the first woman of color in that position as well, which was a whole thing. And my partner and I, we were sitting in a restaurant. It was November of 2017. And I remember wearing my work clothes. I must have been wearing a blazer or something. I came from the office and we were having dinner and he said something very simple. Isn't it weird that next week it'll be a year since the election happened? And I just completely lost it. Like I could not stop crying sitting there in that restaurant, just waterfall, just unstoppable. Our poor server was like, good. What? I was like, I could barely even talk. And I was so sad reflecting on the fact that a year had gone by, that our former, horrible president that we had during that time had been doing so much harm for a year, that so much had been going on. Meanwhile, I'm just trying to figure out how to do timesheets and lead a team and do things. I was like, what am I even doing? Another year of my life has passed. What do I have to show for it? Meanwhile, all this harm has been done. It just was really overwhelmed by the passage of that time. And with I sitting there in that restaurant, I thought, I have to quit my job. We have to break up. I need to move. I got to get out of here. It was like old Annie tendencies was like to travel, to do things, to move, to change things up. It's like, I gotta go. I can't. And I remember talking to my boss, a different boss who replaced my last boss, and told her, I said, I think I told her the next day, I'm quitting, I'm leaving, I'm breaking up with Matt. I don't know where I'm going, but I'm getting out of here. She said, let's hold on. And she helped me get some time off. And I sat in her office crying through it, very similar to about a year and a half before that. She said, and I would just in so much gratitude that somebody didn't see me as weak, as like not having it together, because that's what it felt like. She said, just take some time. And so I took a month off and I drove to Chicago, where one of my mom's best friends lives, arrived on her doorstep and stayed with her for a month. And I thought I would get back into running and it was January of 2018. Like January in Chicago is like not for running, it's for sliding and slipping on ice and throwing out my back, which is what I did. So I ended up spending about a month going to the acupuncture down the street from her apartment, and then took a couple drives. I spent a little bit of time in Detroit while I was out there, just calming my mind. I was so overcome with anxiety, not just in that period, but like I realized for like a couple of years. And so while I was in Chicago, the goal, I arrived with all these ideas of what I was going to do and goals to kind of get myself back, but none of that could happen because I threw out my back. And so I just stopped. And I started for the very first time at that point. I didn't have any social media at all, no Facebook or anything at that point. This was 2018. But I was feeling really compelled to write. And so I started a blog called This Beloved Life. And it was thisbeloved.com. It doesn't exist anymore. Those blog posts still do, but I was compelled to start writing. And I was like, I don't care if anybody reads this, but it felt a little exhilarating, the idea that somebody might. And so I was writing almost every day that I was out there. And by the time I was coming back home a month later, end of January 2018, I felt like a different person. It's like, I'm back. I'm good. I can go back. I feel ready. I can totally do this. And I was working on a really important project at the organization that I was director of. And I thought, I'm going to go back and finish that project. I think I could stay till the end of the year. I went back in February of 18 and just was immediately like, wah, wah, all the sirens were blaring like this. Nope. You got to get out. You got to get out. So I stayed till July. I really needed to finish this project. It felt important to me. And I kept leaning on this friend in Chicago, who to this day is just such a sense of safety for me. My sister and I at this point had really grieved in very different directions after losing our mom at this point about 3.5, almost 4 years before. I didn't feel like I had her to turn to, which was really difficult. And I think I've only recently, like this year, 2023, really started to understand and fully grieve, like scour the corners of those grief containers, not just losing my mom, but kind of losing my sister too, because we don't have a relationship anymore. We're a lot like a divorced couple, just communicate around the kids. It's very difficult. Like Annie was becoming this independent person, separate from her sister. I now understand was also a pretty codependent relationship. Took therapy to understand that. I was like, oh yeah, that's what Okay, that makes
Mhm.
sense. That makes a lot of sense. So it was a lot of finding myself, like
Mhm.
really trying to understand who I am on my own 2 feet, who doesn't need my sister to sign off on something, or my mom to tell me what to do, or my boss to guide me in the direction. It's so important to have mentors and beloveds and chosen family and family of origin who do get us and see us. But if I've learned anything, it's that I literally have everything I need.
Mhm.
I am my own champion. Like, I love me. I love hanging out with me. I've got the answers. I've got the hugs. I've got the love and the compassion that I think as an inherent, like, real core to who I am is a nurturer and a caregiver. Felt like I needed to give care and love to other people in order to receive it, to feel loved. And that may still be true in some ways, but I really understand what it means to trust myself, which is not the thing somebody who's lost wants to hear. Just trust yourself. Just listen.
Mhm.
Just, it's like, tell me the answer.
Mhm.
But know deep in my bones that I am the person I've been looking for. I
Mhm.
am the one with the answers. And my mom taught me, my sister showed me. But really, it was like, okay, I figured out a little later than most people have to get on their own feet at, 18, 20, whatever. I figured it out around 35 and then had to keep figuring, like, unlearning and untangling old trauma and old pain and old this, that, the other. That now at 42, I feel like, okay, now I got it.
Well, thank you for sharing your journey because I feel like so many of us are on journeys similar to yours. And people listening, I know, are on those journeys of like, what does that look like? What does it look like? Because you kept saying, people who you felt safe with. And that what I heard from you at the end was you understanding how to be safe within yourself, which I feel like is something I work with women on a lot. It's like, how can you not be uh, what is the word? But really handing off your safety to somebody else and instead learning what is that safety within, because that safety within is actually going to provide you with the answers and the things that you're looking for in your life and your ability to discern the right choices for yourself and not outsourcing was the word I was thinking earlier, but really outsourcing worth, outsourcing safety, outsourcing decisions, choices in your own life. And that's where I feel like women, we get so fragmented and we lose who we are because we are outsourcing things, even to really wonderful people, until we start to learn that those answers only really do reside within. And that requires us to really be in that work of like, what is my own worth? What is my value within myself? And then to value your own opinions enough to say, oh, that's the right choice for me. Does that feel like an accurate
Absolutely.
assessment? Yeah.
It feels really true for me. I can remember when my beloved boss mentor who left and I took her job and then I had a new boss because now I'm in a new role and so I'm reporting to the VP of, the department that I was in. I remember her, this second boss, whom I love so much. Her name is Jen. I remember her telling me there was some project, something that I was pitching an idea for. And I, it was like my first time. I must have been 34, 35 at this point, but it was the first time I was really in like a jobby job where because my path was totally different in my 20s. So I was like, there must be a way, like a standard way to present something, to
Mhm.
share the thing. And I'm like, okay, well, how do you want me to show it? She's like, just whatever you want, just write it up, whatever you think. Give me the thing. And I remember being so hung up on not knowing how it was supposed to be done, thinking that there was a way. There must be a way, a standard way. And that thinking, that idea, because I had never done something before, there must be a way, like somebody let me just look up the way to pitch the thing or propose the thing. Um, so it took having to go through the discomfort of not knowing how to do something in fairly high stakes, fairly like high level professional world. There's things having to do with like national partners and stuff where I didn't want to look stupid, like I didn't know what I was doing. So in that way, like, okay, well, if Jen would just tell me how she wants it, then I'll do it how she wants. But to realize, oh my goodness, there's actually no standard way to do anything in the whole wide world. In this life that we live, there is no actual way. Every single thing is made up. And maybe something gets repeated enough times that somehow a collective or a whole society of people, a whole community of people starts to agree that this is how we do it. Hello, white supremacy culture. But in reality, it's all made up. Everybody is
Totally.
making it up. It's let me type this thing up and now this is the thing. It's like, great, that's
Totally.
okay. I had always wanted a blueprint for things. That same was true when I started my business. If I could just find the blueprint, I will follow the steps and then I'll make it my own. But really realizing that's just someone else's way of doing it. Does that work? Sometimes it's helpful to have a first draft. Give me a first draft and then I can, but in reality, when we're talking about the really deep and meaningful things that sort of shift the trajectories of our lives, our businesses, our relationships, our own ideas about who we are as individuals, I really think that the idea of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable could not be stated loudly enough. And unfortunately, the only way to do that is to get uncomfortable. You have to go through the thing and feel like you don't know, feel kind of stupid, feel ill equipped, feel unprepared. When in reality, the more you do it, the older we get, the more wisdom we gather. It's like, oh, nobody actually knows what they're doing. Everybody's just figuring it out as they go.
Hmm. Well, what you're saying too, because getting uncomfortable takes some level of being okay with that. And so, what would you even say for someone who's like, okay, I want to start to get uncomfortable? How do you even start to venture that in that route? Because it's scary. It's like, oh, well, like comfort feels good. You're like, I know how to do this job. I know how to live this life. I know how to be in this relationship. I know how to be the child that my parents expect me to be, or the sibling that my expects me to be. And then you start to venture outside of it, like what, and even me saying this, I was like, oh my gosh, that sounds totally overwhelming, because none of us want to do that, because that doesn't sound very fun, because it starts to change things, right? So what would you offer to someone who's like on the cusp of that journey, because they also know that that comfort is killing them, like that comfort is killing their soul, killing their desires, their purpose. And so what would you give to them as that first step? Like, what is one little thing that they could do to start to say, okay, I'm going to go down that pathway instead?
It's sort of I hope it doesn't come off abstract, but it's like the least tangible, but it leads to the tangible. And I've tried it enough times and coached enough people that I know the way something that Adrienne Marie Brown says in Emergent Strategy is about. She talks about the most graceful next step. What is the
Mm.
most natural, graceful next step? And I think when it comes to making a change, if you're doing something that's sucking your soul and your spirit, and it's, even though it might all look good on the surface, but you want to make a change and you know that you have to get uncomfortable, and oh my God, it's like, well, how am I going to get by without my salary for the period if I want to start my own business? Or as an example, it's a lot of things I work with people on. I think it's really important not to just leap to starting the business or leap to the thing, but to actually do nothing and to allow yourself to daydream. If we can imagine ourselves in the situation that we desire, and not just, oh, it would be nice to, like the quick movie montage reel, but really, like, what does it feel like to be there? What would it feel like? Yes, it will be scary to not have this comfort that I'm used to, whatever that comfort may be, but I know that I'm yearning for a change. And I may not even know what that change is yet, but I know it's not this. I need something different than the current reality. Rather than stepping into a place that feels super scary, I think there's something really beautiful and very simple and very potent about imagining what could be like really, and not capturing it, not whiteboarding it, not goal planning it, not strategizing it, but really kind of unencumbered cloud gazing, daydreaming, maybe, going out, whatever we do in our normal daily lives. Like maybe somebody's a runner and they're like, okay, you could do it while you're out running, but consciously not listening. Don't put earbuds in. Don't listen to a podcast. Don't listen. Just be with yourself. Like I was just somebody very recently, in fact, a couple of weeks ago, I was in conversation with who I had met early in 2018 when I had started my business, who just recently was laid off from a big corporate, just very recently, big corporate job, and trying to figure out where they're going to go next. And he was asking me about doing a visioning session. Could we just do like a 90-minute visioning session? I was like, oh, no, 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 no. That's not going to happen in 90 minutes. Like, I want you to do nothing for as long as you financially can. Is it a week? Don't look for a job for a week. Just rest like your life depends on it. Sleep and nap and veg and wander and literally stare at the clouds for as long as you can and even beyond, because it's usually as long as we can is our comfort level. But going beyond that for another day or another week, like I should be. It's like, no, 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 just do nothing for a little bit longer than makes you feel comfortable, and allow this amazing elder, this Tewa woman here, elder Kathy Sanchez here in New Mexico. She's from Tewa lands. She's just this brilliant elder who's created an amazing community of support for Pueblo Native women, but all over the country, but with a focus here in New Mexico on the Pueblo folks. She talks about quantum thinking and how quantum thinking, it's not pull out all my whiteboard stuff and Post-its, but these short, like maybe 10 or 15 minutes of after the daydreaming, after the imagining, after the unencumbered cloud gazing, maybe tomorrow there's like a 10 to 15-minute quantum thinking session where it's like this deep, like going down into the well, almost strategizing. But if I've just imagined what could be for 10 or 15 minutes, how would I get there? And not dragging it out, and then capturing after. And then it's like you've got this combination of daydream components and quantum thinking components. And okay, what would be looking at it, only you can collect that information, right? Only you have that thinking inside of you, that knowing, that deep, like inner wisdom in you about what is your most graceful next step. A coach can't really tell you. Like, we could ask the right questions or some questions, and it might not be the right one for that person. It takes time, but we can actually coach ourselves by getting quiet and then doing these little spurts of deep, deep, deep concentrated thinking. And then it's like we capture that. We capture that on the whiteboard. We capture that on some Post-its and start to see, only we can see where a dot might be able to be connected, where it might make sense to go next. And making sure, as Julia Cameron says in The Artist's Way, to keep the wet blankets away. The people who don't get it, who are going to be like, oh, what are you thinking? You could never, that's a terrible idea. You don't want to leave your safe salaried, job, whatever. Keep the idea protected, like a little sacred seed, and just hold it really, really close. Maybe there's one maybe two, probably just one really trusted, safe people that you could share it with that might be able to guide, sort of clear a little bit from the path to determine what the actual next step is. But I don't think it's an action-oriented step to begin. I really believe that it's deep, deep, deep quiet. Deep quiet for as long as can be.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for that. I feel like that is so needed for all of us anyway, like that deep quiet in space. And then to understand that deep quiet in space is on its own beautiful and actually can start to lead you into the things you really wish you knew. And you just have to actually be in that exploration of self for that. So thank you so much for sharing that, Annie. It's such a lovely vision to understand how to do that. All right, are you ready for some rapid fire questions here?
Let's do it. I'm a little
Okay,
scared, but yes,
amazing.
let's do it.
You're very gentle, I promise. Okay. What was the last thing that you watched on TV?
Oh, what was the last thing? Sopranos. We're currently in the middle of watching it from beginning to end.
Oh,
I think
that
we're in
is such a
season 4.
fun. Yeah, that's a really fun deep dive. I love The Sopranos. Awesome. Okay, what is on your nightstand?
Radiant Rest by Tracy Stanley. The Shamanic Bones of Zen. Is that the name of it? And I'm missing the name of the author, the Zen Buddhist. She lives in Santa Fe. Those 2 books, a lavender lip balm, and a blue highlighter.
Gonna highlight your books.
Yes, always.
Awesome. When was the last time you tried something new and what was it?
That is a very good question. What was the last thing I tried something new? I'm having a hard time remembering, but I will share one that I'm going to do that I've decided in the last 2 weeks, which have been a really potent 2 weeks for me. Something that's very outside of my comfort zone. Very. Because I work very hard at not looking foolish, not stumbling and falling while walking, having it together. I have decided recently that I'm going to take an acting class in order to get out of my body. I'm not trying to be an actor,
Mm,
but I want to push
mhm.
myself. And it could not be more new or more uncomfortable or scary, but I'm excited. I just decided this about 2 weeks ago.
Fantastic. I can't wait to hear how that goes. That sounds like a very, for me too, would be way outside the comfort zone. All right. And then what are the 3 top most used emojis on your phone?
Oh, the dark red heart, the one that is technically like the playing cards,
Yeah.
that heart, the melty face emoji. It's like,
Yes.
I love that guy. And it's probably back and forth between the lightning bolt and the little plant sprout.
The plant sprout. Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Awesome. I love it. Well, Annie, where can people find you or learn more about you from this conversation?
Oh, my website, anniesanchez.co, will take people to all the places. Yeah, anniesanchez.co, or my podcast, Courage, Culture, and Clarity. Season 3 is about to come out. Maybe when people are listening to this, it might be out now.
Mm.
Courage, Culture, and Clarity, and anniesanchez.co.
Amazing. Well, Annie, it's been such an honor to have you and hearing your wisdom and your sharing and also your journey, which I feel like for me is the intention really of this podcast is for people to understand journeys and understand really it never ends and we're all on one and to hear from other women who are so strong and really have done so much of that work for us to all learn from. So thank you so much for sharing who you are with all of us here on School of Self-Worth.
Thank you for inviting me and my story. It was an honor, truly. Thank you, Nicole.